A judge publicly fined her concerning a small cross necklace, believing she was simply another person present. However, when she rose and spoke, the entire courtroom became quiet, and the subsequent events left even the bailiff astonished. Alana Merriweather did not go to the Rutherford County Courthouse, anticipating conflict. She went to support her younger cousin, Deshawn, who'd been arrested following a routine traffic stop that had escalated into a considerably larger matter. She requested a day of leave from work, chose a navy blue blouse, slacks, and flats. The outfit was simple and understated, yet respectful. A delicate gold chain with a small cross hung around her neck. It was not ostentatious, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. Someone did notice. The courtroom was full. It contained people awaiting their turns, lawyers reviewing documents, and deputies positioned along the walls. Alana settled into the second row, remaining quiet and composed. Her purse rested in her lap. She nodded softly to her cousin, who appeared exhausted from stress, his eyes weighed down by fatigue. He remained silent, offering her a look of thanks. That was sufficient. Judge Raymond Keller entered with his characteristic formal walk. The judge was known for a particular demeanor. Across Murfreesboro and in surrounding areas, lawyers spoke of his meticulous nature, traditional, direct, and unyielding. A Vietnam veteran who transitioned to a legal career, he regarded the courtroom as a space of great importance. His space. The bailiff called the room to order. Before proceeding, Judge Keller addressed the room, looking at the attendees as he said, "I'd like to address a matter of decorum." He looked directly at Alana. "You, ma'am, the one in blue. Please rise." Alana blinked, surprised, and slowly stood. Her heart thudded a little faster, but she kept her posture straight. "You're wearing a religious symbol," he said, his voice firm. "That's not permitted in my courtroom. Neutrality matters here." A fine of $50 was levied for disrupting court decorum. The room fell silent. Some individuals adjusted in their seats. Others averted their gaze, visibly uncomfortable. Alana did not respond immediately. She was familiar with being publicly singled out, questioned, and dismissed, yet she still felt surprised. A fine? For wearing a necklace? She glanced at the bailiff, then back to the judge. "Your Honor," she stated calmly, "is this a published policy? Could you please direct me to the statute or court rule that permits that penalty?" Keller showed no visible reaction. "This is my courtroom. I established the procedures." Alana nodded thoughtfully. "I comprehend that, sir. However, are those procedures documented anywhere?" He fixed his gaze on her for a brief moment. "You may pay the fine at the clerk's desk, or you may depart." She detected a quiet intake of breath from someone seated behind her. Alana remained still. She did not speak louder. She did not engage in debate. She merely inclined her head slightly and stated, "I am not leaving." A gentleman in the front row, an older man wearing a tan suit, lifted his eyebrow. His gaze moved from her to Judge Keller and back again. Judge Keller slowly straightened his robe. "Then you will be held in contempt?" The bailiff subtly changed his stance. The prosecutor set aside his file. A palpable change occurred. The atmosphere felt denser, not with theatrics, but with focused concentration. Alana released a single breath through her nose. "I'm here to support my cousin, Deshawn Grissom. The charges are being formally presented today, and he requested my presence. I'm not intending to cause any disturbance, Your Honor. However, I contend that this fine is not only unjust, but potentially unlawful." Judge Keller moved forward a little. "Did you question my jurisdiction?" Her expression remained unchanged. "I am requesting an explanation of the policy and its legal basis." He hesitated briefly. It was slight, almost unnoticeable, but the pause was present. He did not anticipate that. "Who are you?" he inquired, his voice growing tense. "My name is Alana Merriweather," she replied, "and I'm a constitutional attorney licensed in 3 states, including Tennessee." The courtroom cracked open. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath. Someone whispered under their breath, "Damn." She continued, measured and composed. "I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2010. I've worked for the Southern Center for Human Rights, and I currently serve as senior counsel at a nonprofit based in Memphis. I am present as a family member, but I understand the law and I am aware of my rights. Keller relaxed back in his chair. For the first time, he appeared uneasy, not angry, simply unsteady. She could have smiled. She refrained. The ensuing silence was palpable. The judge began to speak, but stopped, instead rearranging the papers on his desk. However, the judge was unaware of who he was addressing. Alana did not grow up with wealth. She was raised in Jackson, Mississippi, in a faded brick duplex off of Robinson Road. Denise, her mother, held overnight shifts at the Willow Creek nursing home, and her father left when she was 8. Resources were scarce, but a set of principles guided them. Speak with clarity. Avoid minimizing your worth. Assert yourself when injustice occurs, but maintain composure and a dignified demeanor. By the age of 16, Alana had studied the Constitution from beginning to end on 2 separate occasions. She sought to comprehend the disparate treatment experienced by individuals like herself in courtrooms, offices, stores, and even churches. Her motivation wasn't anger, but rather a genuine curiosity. There was also a deeper element at play, a quiet determination. People consistently underestimated her, not only due to her brown skin or her choice to wear her hair natural, but also in subtle ways, like overlooking her in meetings. She remembered the way older male attorneys would address her as young lady, within rooms filled with men experiencing thinning hair and fragile egos. She quickly understood that possessing brilliance was insufficient. There were times when it needed to be carried quietly, allowing them to believe they were more astute, until they unwittingly stepped into a carefully constructed plan. When Alana was accepted into Harvard Law, it felt less like a joyous occasion and more like a validation. She had previously informed her high school counselor that her aspiration was to become a civil rights attorney. A genuine laugh escaped her. Then, she cautioned that law school presented fierce competition and wasn't necessarily a viable option. Alana remained silent. She simply intensified her studies. While attending Harvard, she wasn't boisterous. She found no need to be. She consistently occupied the front row of each constitutional law class, rapidly taking notes and posing questions that caused professors to pause. People began to observe her, yet still regarded her as unusual. This perception never felt satisfactory to her. After graduating, she declined 2 offers from large firms seeking impactful work. She spent several years in Alabama, defending minors within the legal system. Then, she moved to Memphis to join a nonprofit dedicated to combating housing discrimination. While she didn't gain widespread recognition, her work secured people's release from jail and kept families in their homes, transforming lives. Throughout this, she consistently wore her small gold cross, a deeply personal symbol. The brooch had been her grandmother's, accompanied by a handwritten note. It read, "Wear this when you need to be reminded you're not alone." Her grandmother never removed it. Not once. Not even in court. Therefore, when Judge Keller singled her out, calling her out as if she were a disruptive teenager in detention, it didn't unsettle her. It evoked memories of the instances she's experienced being looked at and not truly seen. They never anticipated her. They anticipated the boisterous one, the angry one. There was someone poised to lash out or leave abruptly. Instead, they experienced something else entirely, a demonstration of precision, control, and strength through composure. This wasn't unprecedented. In 2017, within a courtroom in Little Rock, she observed a public defender struggle during a bail hearing. The judge seemed disengaged. The defendant, a 19-year-old facing trespassing charges at an abandoned building, was on the verge of being assigned $1,500 bail, an amount he was unlikely to afford. Alana rose, introduced herself, and referenced 3 Arkansas statutes that the judge seemed to have missed. The judge conceded. Bail was waived. The defendant was released that same day. That demonstrated her character. Consequently, sitting in Rutherford County, facing a fine for a necklace of great personal significance, before a judge who believed he could compel her to be silent, Alana remained steadfast. She straightened her posture. When she introduced herself to the courtroom, her name, her qualifications, her purpose for being present, it wasn't intended for Judge Keller. It was directed toward everyone who perceived her as simply someone's relative. However, today wasn't a day when silence was an option. The courtroom remained quiet for an unusually long time. Judge Keller shuffled papers, seemingly stalling. But Alana remained still, her hands clasped before her, patiently waiting. Not contesting, merely waiting. From the far corner, the prosecutor subtly adjusted his posture, his fingers still. The bailiff's gaze moved between Keller and Alana. A change was palpable. The room's power dynamic had altered. It wasn't solely emanating from the bench. Keller spoke, clearing his throat. This court will proceed with the next case. He refrained from mentioning the fine again, at least for now. However, the absence of his usual reprimand was keenly observed. Deshawn's case was then called. He remained standing, still wearing the wrinkled button-down shirt from county lockup. He looked at Alana, his eyes reflecting both pride and concern. She offered him a singular, composed glance, a look conveying, "Don't panic. I've got this." The public defender approached the table. However, before he could speak, Alana moved forward. "Your Honor," she stated distinctly, "with the court's permission, I would like to represent Mr. Grissom today. I've reviewed the charges and spoken with him. He desires me to stand in his defense." Judge Keller looked up. "You aren't listed as counsel. I presented my bar card. My Tennessee license is current. You can verify with the Board of Professional Responsibility I am listed as Alana Joy Merriweather." He paused a moment too long and then nodded once. "Proceed." Alana moved to stand beside Deshawn. Her cousin appeared to want to laugh and cry simultaneously. She placed one hand gently on his shoulder as she turned to address the court. Mr. Grissom was stopped due to a non-functioning tail light. The arrest report indicates he was asked to leave the vehicle and subjected to a search without consent. No warrant was present. The officer's statement made no mention of probable cause. Additionally, the encounter progressed to resisting arrest when he inquired about the reason for being handcuffed. He did not raise his voice, nor did he threaten anyone. She retrieved a document from her purse. "I've submitted a written motion to dismiss, supported by 3 Tennessee Supreme Court rulings. Each affirms that a warrantless search under these circumstances constitutes a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Additionally, the resisting arrest charge lacks supporting video evidence, despite officers wearing department-issued body cams." The room was still again. Alana frowned, leaned back, and accepted the motion from the clerk. He reviewed it. It was evident. With a rapid scan of the room and a slight twitch of his jaw, Alana remained silent. She stood motionless, allowing him to read, while ensuring her presence was undeniable. Behind her, people subtly adjusted their positions, not from disinterest, but from focused attention. This was no longer the woman they believed was in distress just moments prior. This was a different person altogether. Judge Keller looked up. "You wrote this motion yourself?" "I did. I prepared this draft last night following a review of the police report and a conversation regarding the arrest with Mr. Grissom, and I am not affiliated with a law firm. I am employed by a civil rights nonprofit. Our organization focuses on due process violations, housing discrimination, and wrongful convictions." The judge tapped the motion lightly on the desk. "Your client's record? No prior arrests. No violent offenses. He's a full-time electrician's apprentice, simply trying to get to work on time the day this occurred." Another long silence. Keller turned to the prosecutor. "State's position?" The prosecutor paused. "We'd be willing to dismiss the resisting charge, maintain the traffic infraction." Alana spoke again, her voice resolute. "We'd agree to that only with the court confirmation that the search was unlawful. Mr. Grissom deserves that documented." It was a confident move. No apologies. No hesitation. Simply a direct, justifiable request supported by legal precedent. Keller observed her. The courtroom rarely witnessed such assertiveness. A woman, a black woman, effortlessly navigating legal procedures. She did so without displaying anger or arrogance, simply presenting clear and precise facts. He adjusted his glasses. The motion to dismiss was granted. The traffic infraction remains with a warning, and no fines will be assessed. Alana offered a subtle nod, devoid of a smile or celebratory gestures. She then turned to Deshawn. "You're free to go." He paused momentarily, as if his body needed time to process the news. Subsequently, he left the defendant's table and embraced her firmly. A murmur rippled through the courtroom once more. It wasn't regarding the case itself, but about her. However, what Alana did next silenced everyone. Instead of returning to her place, she faced the bench, her voice remaining calm. "Before I sit down, Your Honor, I would like to formally challenge the fine issued earlier this morning." Keller visibly recoiled, as if startled. "Do you want to reopen that matter?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied. "You stated that religious symbols were not permitted in your courtroom. However, unless this courtroom is functioning under martial law, the First Amendment remains applicable." Her tone was measured. She did not need to raise her voice. In County of Allegheny versus ACLU, the Supreme Court underscored the requirement for government institutions to maintain neutrality rather than hostility towards religion. Prohibiting a small cross pendant, particularly from an individual who is not testifying or speaking to the court at that moment, does not represent neutrality. The action appeared as targeted suppression, and the gallery had gone completely still. Alana advanced 1 foot. Additionally, there was no written policy displayed, no public signage indicating the ban, and no prior warning provided. "I am found without citation, without precedent, and without any attempt to verify my intent or role in the proceedings." Keller adjusted in his seat. His face had lost some of its typical composure. One could observe something stirring behind his eyes: calculation, doubt, perhaps even shame. "Are you suggesting the court violated your rights?" he inquired. Alana remained motionless. "I am not making accusations. I am presenting established facts. I request the fine be rescinded, and the court record should indicate that this incident transpired outside established protocol." The prosecutor glanced up momentarily, then resumed, looking down. The bailiff's hands were now clasped before him, his jaw tense, and his posture more formal. Keller hesitated before replying. He fixed his gaze on her for a prolonged, intense period. Then he announced, "The fine is withdrawn." This wouldn't be documented. Alana offered a brief nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." She pivoted and proceeded to her place with composure. Murmurs arose once more. However, this time, they weren't filled with uncertainty. Instead, they conveyed interest and deference. A woman seated behind her silently asked another, "Who is she?" Alana remained uninvolved. She simply took her seat, retrieved her notebook, and gently opened it to a fresh page. The judge, for the first time that morning, seemed to be truly contemplating. His movements became more deliberate. He examined the files with greater attention. The issue he's ignited by the fine for the necklace had escalated. It had become something more significant. The prosecutor spoke quietly to the bailiff, who acknowledged with a nod and jotted a note. The shift was noticeable. Court reconvened. Several more cases were heard. However, the usual flow was disrupted. The observers were no longer focused on the legal charges. Their gazes repeatedly returned to Alana Merriweather, the woman who had corrected a judge without raising her voice. 30 minutes elapsed. Then, unexpectedly, Judge Keller called for a brief recess. He rose and exited through the side door silently. Alana remained seated. The bailiff approached her slowly. "Mom," he said, softer than previously, "may I pose a question to you?" She turned her head slightly. "Of course. Did you anticipate that occurring? Regarding the fine? Concerning everything?" Alana emitted the slightest laugh through her nose. "No, I was unaware of that, but I wasn't willing to ignore it." The bailiff touched the back of his neck. "I've been here for 8 years," he said. "Never seen him back down like that." "He's not a bad man," she said softly. "But power without accountability is dangerous," he agreed. It wasn't a matter of obligation, but comprehension. Further down the hall, 2 court reporters spoke quietly. The younger one appeared visibly shaken. She was familiar with every case, reciting them easily. "Lawyer?" one asked. "Yes, from Harvard. Can you believe that?" She attended to support her cousin and unexpectedly challenged the judge. The courtroom observers expressed disbelief. However, Alana felt no sense of triumph. She found no pleasure in undermining someone. Her purpose wasn't to shame Keller. She simply sought justice. When it was lacking, she created it herself, carefully and deliberately. Yet, a subtle shift began to appear in Judge Keller's gaze. Upon his return to the courtroom, Judge Keller seemed altered. His posture lacked its previous rigidity. He appeared unchanged in stature, simply quieter. No longer seemed a man attempting to maintain authority, but rather someone attempting to grasp how he relinquished it without awareness. He took a seat, adjusted his glasses, and proceeded to the next case. Even his voice had diminished in tone. It was subtly altered, almost imperceptible to an ordinary observer, yet Alana recognized it. She had witnessed this previously. Men in positions of influence struggling with a reality they resisted acknowledging. That they had transgressed a boundary, and someone unanticipated had retaliated. As the courtroom emptied and people moved towards the exit, Keller remained seated on the bench, his gaze fixed forward. Alana collected her belongings and was nearing the door when she heard him call out, "Ms. Merriweather." She paused and turned, her face showing no emotion. He rose from his seat and descended the steps deliberately, as if considering each one. "I'd like a word, if you're willing." The bailiff seemed uneasy, questioning whether this was a directive or a private inquiry. Alana offered a subtle nod, then turned to Deshawn. "Give me 5, she murmured to him. Keller refrained from escorting her into chambers. They remained just outside the vacant courtroom, maintaining enough distance for some discretion, yet remaining visible. He cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Alana didn't reply. Not yet. She allowed him to formulate his thoughts. "I formed an assumption," he proceeded, "an inequitable one, regarding your intentions, regarding your position. I was mistaken," she responded gently, but without resentment. He lowered his gaze. "That's the difficulty, isn't it? One shouldn't need to be." Another pause. "I have dedicated 32 years to that bench," Keller stated, "and I have valued order, structure, neutrality. But you help me understand, occasionally what we consider neutral is simply convenient for those already in power." The statement impacted him more profoundly than anticipated. Alana simply looked at him, maintaining steady, respectful eye contact. There was no trace of ego, only honesty in her silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he stated, "but I will say this. I won't forget today." Alana offered a slight nod. "That's all I hoped for." She prepared to leave, but he called out to her one last time. "If you're ever back in Murfreesboro, I'd be honored to hear you argue again." That element genuinely surprised her. "I hope not to need to," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. They both understood the unspoken meaning behind her words. The sun had risen higher, and the heat was intense. Deshawn stood near the sidewalk, looking at his phone. He brightened when he saw her. "What is that?" he asked, astonished. Alana shrugged, retrieving her keys from her purse. "Just a small civics lesson." "Seriously, you confronted a judge. In his home." She gave him a look. "Don't make it sound heroic. I didn't go there to fight. I want to hear what he had to say." When someone attempts to diminish your importance for reasons related to your identity, you face a choice. Remain silent or voice your perspective. Deshawn leaned against her car, nodding slowly. "I swear, if I didn't know you better, I'd say you rehearsed that," I remarked. She laughed. "I didn't, but maybe I should start writing it down." At that moment, a local reporter from the Murfreesboro News Journal approached, holding a voice recorder and a notebook. "Ms. Merriweather?" Alana turned. I observed what unfolded. "Our readers would likely appreciate hearing your perspective. Would you consider an interview?" She looked at Deshawn, then returned her gaze to the reporter. "Let me consider that." The reporter offered her a card and stepped back. "You prompted considerable thought today. Such occurrences are infrequent in court." As I walked toward the car, Deshawn remarked, "They will discuss this, you know." Alana shrugged again. "Let them, however." What transpired outside the courtroom held equal significance. As Alana and Deshawn arrived at his apartment complex on the west side of Murfreesboro, his phone was constantly buzzing. Calls, texts, and even direct messages flooded in. A cousin in Chattanooga had already learned the news. A friend from high school had sent a screenshot of a local news blog displaying the headline: Attorney silently dismantles courtroom bias. Judge withdraws fine, dismisses case. Deshawn looked at her, his eyes wide. It's already on the internet? Alana offered a small smile. I mentioned to you, people discuss events, particularly when expectations aren't met. She did not seek recognition. Not currently. Not in the past. However, there were occasions when being noticed wasn't a decision. It was a consequence of acting correctly when the option of remaining unnoticed wasn't available. Afterward that evening, she was at her kitchen table, drinking tea, the small cross necklace still on her collarbone. Her inbox contained numerous messages, some from familiar people, others from unknown individuals. Several legal blogs had already published summaries. A user on Twitter had shared a clip from the live stream, adding the caption, "This is how you correct injustice," without ever raising your voice. However, Alana wasn't paying attention to any of that. She was considering a statement from Judge Keller. What we often consider neutral is simply convenient for those already wielding the authority. That observation resonated with her. She recalled her childhood, holding her grandmother's hand during evening church service. The pastor's words resonated. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is not shout. It's stand. Initially, it seemed like a poetic statement. Now it felt genuine. The following day, she returned to her position at the nonprofit office in Memphis. Her colleagues did not alter their behavior toward her. There were no celebratory balloons or enthusiastic applause. Instead, one of the interns presented her with a file and requested she review a housing complaint by noon. She appreciated the normalcy of it. Information still circulated, even without her direct involvement. A week later, she received a call from the Middle Tennessee State University Law Department. They were planning a community forum concerning courtroom ethics and bias, and a member of their board had recommended her as a speaker. She nearly declined. Nearly. Then she recalled the courtroom, the shift in people's gaze when they recognized her as an individual, and how many others remained voiceless, awaiting someone to advocate for them. Consequently, she consented to participate in the forum. 14 days later, a pastor from a church in Smyrna contacted her. He requested that she address their youth group regarding the law, its true meaning, its protective function, and how it can be applied equitably if individuals understand how to ensure its accountability. She accepted the invitation. She continued to agree, not due to enjoying the focus, but because the narrative was no longer solely hers. It belonged to all who had ever occupied the rear of a courtroom and considered, "They won't hear me." She had never shared this with Keller. However, that day had also altered her. She frequently reflected on him. She questioned whether he retained that moment within his memory as she did. If he ever observed someone in his courtroom differently afterward, perhaps with increased consideration, perhaps with a touch more humility. She hoped so. One Friday afternoon, as she was leaving the office, she noticed an envelope affixed to her door. It bore no name and no return address, only her name typed neatly. Inside was a brief note that read, "Ms. Merriweather, I've revised the courtroom conduct guidelines. Religious attire or symbols, unless disruptive, will no longer be penalized." That was all. There was no apology. No signature appeared beyond the initials. Yet it was sufficient. She folded the note and placed it within her grandmother's Bible. Alana Merriweather didn't seek recognition. She desired equity. Certain narratives briefly capture attention before fading. Others resonate deeply, altering perspectives, even without direct interaction with the individual who initiated that change. For Alana Merriweather, that courtroom moment represented not a culmination, but a segment within a more extensive narrative. A narrative encompassing decisions largely unseen by others. For instance, staying up all night to assist a tenant contesting an unlawful eviction. Dealing with late-night calls from worried mothers whose sons were detained without bail. Or traveling 3 hours to a courthouse in Jackson simply to observe a judge who was reported to be unfairly treating defendants with limited financial resources. She made no introductions. She simply observed, documented her findings, and waited for discernible trends to emerge. When questioned about her composure and restraint in the face of disrespect, she consistently replied, "I know what I carry." She didn't need to demonstrate its weight to show it was heavy. That courtroom didn't alter her. It simply reinforced why she selected this profession initially. Not for recognition, not for retribution, for respect. She had no desire to embarrass Judge Keller. She aimed to make him consider. And in that, she was successful. Some time passed, and during a talk with a group of teenage girls at a public charter school in Memphis, one of them asked, "Weren't you the woman who spoke directly to the judge and caused him to appear mistaken?" Alana responded with a smile. "I didn't speak directly to him. I spoke with purpose. And I didn't cause him to appear mistaken. I offered him an opportunity to reconsider." The girls seemed surprised. "Isn't that essentially the same thing?" Alana replied, "Not in the slightest." Several of the girls chuckled, but a few seemed to take her words to heart. Those were the ones she intended to reach. She continued, "The goal isn't to win arguments. It's to win ground, so the next person doesn't have to fight the same fight." That resonated with them, just as it resonated with her. She understood her story might disappear from news feeds. The tweets, the blogs, the clipped videos, they'd all be lost eventually. But someone would remember. Someone in the gallery who witnessed that moment unfold. Someone who'd felt invisible that day and walked out feeling a little stronger. That was sufficient. Some individuals enter a space seeking attention. Others, like Alana, enter, communicate with precision, and leave a lasting impact. The gold cross remained a daily adornment. She would be prepared again if another courtroom attempted to challenge its presence. For invariably, someone will attempt to diminish you to align with their expectations. And equally, a decision will always present itself, to diminish or to stand, to speak or to allow silence to convey your message. She elected to stand, with insight, not with empty words, not with arrogance, but with a clear objective. And that's what caused people to recall, not that she achieved victory, but how she achieved it. If this narrative resonated with you even slightly, if it prompted thought, emotion, or introspection, then please don't keep it private. Subscribe, distribute it, and help spread it. You never know when your steady voice might be the one that transforms the atmosphere. Two teenagers walked into a car dealership with nothing but excitement and respect. Minutes later, they were asked to leave due to appearing suspicious. The following day, their billionaire father arrived, not to express anger, but to ensure the incident was publicly acknowledged. The sun was heavy over Tempe that afternoon, one of those dry, slow-moving Arizona days where the heat hums through the concrete. After track practice, Malik Townsend walked alongside his sister Ayanna through the parking lot of Madison Auto Gallery, his gray t-shirt damp against his back. They weren't intending to cause any disturbance. Malik, in fact, had been discussing this visit all week. "I'm not saying I'm getting a car today," he said, adjusting the strap of his gym bag. "But I want to see what they have. Maybe something used, you know?" Ayanna laughed, tossing her braids over her shoulder just to gauge expectations before her birthday. "You really think Dad is going to let you drive yourself to school in a two-door coupe?" "Come on," he smiled, but his steps didn't slow. "Let me dream." The dealership lot was still. Sleek silver sedans were arranged under sun-faded flags. The glass doors reflected the heat, and the two entered as any pair of kids with questions and wide eyes. The air conditioning inside was sharp, a contrast to the warmth outside. A middle-aged man wearing a pale blue dress shirt looked up from behind a counter. His gaze first fell on Malik, then moved to Ayanna. They were neatly dressed, Malik in athletic gear, Ayanna in a simple dress and sneakers. Their appearance was unassuming, quiet. Nevertheless, the man rose quickly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice concise. Malik, always courteous, approached. "Yeah, just checking out some cars. Maybe looking for something used?" "My birthday is next month, and do you have an appointment?" A man interrupted, already walking toward them. Malik hesitated. "No, we do not allow unsupervised minors in the showroom." He cut in, glancing quickly at a coworker across the room. "Company policy," Ayanna's face shifted. "We're not touching anything." "Still, This is not a hangout spot. His tone had turned colder now. You can look at the website if you're interested. The silence that followed was thick. Malik started to speak, then stopped. Ayana's fingers gripped the bag strap with force. "We'll leave," Malik said softly. They departed as such. There was no shouting, no resistance. Only the measured walk back along the sidewalk, with Ayana holding her breath throughout. She remained silent until they were settled in the back of the Uber before she spoke. That man regarded us as if we were insignificant. Malik acknowledged with a single, almost imperceptible nod. His jaw tightened. He touched his phone screen, verifying the ride time, and then gazed out the window. Ayana observed her brother's reflection in the glass. She noticed how withdrawn he had become. He wasn't typically a boisterous person, but this felt different. It wasn't simply quietness, it was control. She remembered seeing that expression on their dad's face once before. "You're not going to tell Dad, are you?" He hesitated before replying. "Malik? I don't know," he finally said. "I don't even know what to call it." It's not like the man had said anything outlandish. He simply didn't want us present. Ayana reclined. It seemed unbelievable to me. Neither of them spoke for the remainder of the journey. It wasn't necessary. They were both aware of what had transpired. However, the man at the dealership was completely unaware of who he had just dismissed, and by the following morning, he would discover it. The Uber proceeded through the hills of Paradise Valley, where the houses grew larger, quieter, and more dispersed as they ascended. Ayana sat with her arms crossed inside the black SUV, the tinted windows shielding her simmering frustration. Malik remained silent, holding his phone with the screen dark. His thoughts drifted away. Their home appeared, a contemporary white and stone house situated behind a private gate. It wasn't ostentatious, but possessed an expensive quality typical of established wealth or astute financial acumen. Their father, Charles Townsend, had constructed his technology company from the ground up, initially offering hardware repairs and Flagstaff before achieving success with a data security startup. Currently, his name appeared in Forbes articles and at Silicon Valley panel discussions. However, locally, he was simply known as Charles. The children entered through the side entrance and placed their belongings on the bench close to the kitchen. The house carried a subtle scent of cedar and fresh linen. Their housekeeper, Mrs. K, looked up from the dining table while folding towels. "Hey everyone, is everything all right?" Ayana mumbled in response. Malik did not answer. Their father's voice came from down the hall. "Malik?" Malik appeared in the hallway moments later, still wearing his navy polo, barefoot, and holding tablet. "You're back early," he said, giving a shrug. Charles noticed a slump in his son's shoulders immediately, and the way he avoided eye contact. He glanced at Ayana. Her expression conveyed more than she likely intended. What occurred? Malik remained silent. Charles placed the tablet down and crossed his arms. "Malik," Ayana exhaled. "A man at the dealership stated we were not permitted inside." Charles furrowed his brow. "Which dealership?" "Madison Auto Gallery, located off University Drive." "What precisely did he say?" Malik massaged the back of his neck. "He indicated we weren't allowed to browse. He mentioned they don't allow individuals under the age of 18 without a parent present and accused us of loitering." Charles remained motionless for a considerable time. His eyes narrowed a little, not in anger, but with concentration. That measured, careful assessment that indicated he was anticipating 2 or 3 moves ahead. "What did you do?" "We left," Malik stated. "We didn't want to create a disturbance." That was impactful. Charles inhaled deeply, moved into the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. He offered it to Malik before speaking again. "You acted correctly. Do you understand?" Malik affirmed once. Then, his father settled onto a counter stool and looked squarely at him. "Please understand this. You are not inferior to anyone. I'm not concerned if you arrive in athletic wear or formal attire. Maintain your composure. And if someone perceives you as a cause for concern, that is their responsibility, not yours." Ayana rested against the fridge, observing. Charles continued, his voice calm and measured. "However, you also need to be aware of this. Quietude does not invariably signify strength. Occasionally, allowing minor offenses to occur enables their repetition, first with one individual, and then with another. Malik's throat tightened. "What's the plan?" Charles didn't respond immediately. He surveyed them both, then rose and retrieved his phone. "I'm going to speak with someone," Ionis said, surprised. "With whom?" Charles replied, departing the room. The subsequent hours until tomorrow morning unfolded with an unusual calm. There were no shouts, no hurried phone calls. Charles prepared dinner, as always, grilled salmon, asparagus, and rice. They ate together as a family. A change was palpable. It wasn't animosity, it was determination. That night, Malik lay awake, gazing at the ceiling for a considerable time before finally falling asleep. He didn't fully understand what his dad intended with the discussion, but he sensed it would be more impactful than any outburst. Meanwhile, at the dealership, the manager remained unaware that trouble was brewing. Madison Auto Gallery commenced business at 9 a.m. promptly. As early as 8:45, employees began arriving, their keys jingling, coffee cups in hand, and sunglasses still on. The typical Monday routine. Derek Holton, the assistant sales manager, rested against the front desk, sipping his iced Americano and checking his phone. He no longer recognized many of the names of his inbox. Employee turnover was significant. The position offered good compensation for those who could sell, and he was a skilled salesperson. By 9:03, there was one customer in the parking lot. A navy blue Rolls-Royce Phantom shimmered in the Arizona sun. It did not enter a standard parking spot. It did not wait in the rear. It moved smoothly to the front doors and stopped. Initially, no one exited the vehicle. Derek looked at the receptionist, then walked around the desk. "Are you expecting someone?" he inquired. She replied, her gaze fixed on the car, "No." Then, the door opened. A tall man emerged, wearing a dark blazer, sharply tailored slacks, and shoes polished to a mirror shine. He moved deliberately, with composure. Without preamble, he pushed the glass door open and paused at the entrance. "Good morning," he stated, his voice smooth yet resolute. "I'm seeking a manager." Derek hesitated. "I'm the assistant manager. How may I assist you?" The man fixed him with a direct gaze. "You're not the person I require." At that moment, Kyle Linson, the general manager, emerged from the adjacent office. He was tall, red-faced, and perpetually seemed stressed. "Morning," he said quickly. "I'm Kyle. What can I do for you?" The man retrieved a card from his jacket pocket and offered it. Kyle read the name deliberately. Charles Townsend, founder and chairman. TNS Global. He looked up, a flush rising on his face. Wow, sir. I wasn't expecting," he stammered. "I imagine you weren't either," Charles replied, stepping further inside. "I won't take much of your time." Kyle indicated his office, his eyes briefly darting towards Derek. We could talk in here." But Charles remained still. "No need for privacy. This is a public place." "I'll speak briefly." Kyle nodded, appearing uncomfortable. "Naturally. Please proceed." Charles surveyed the showroom. Yesterday, 2 children entered. One was my son, the other my daughter. Kyle blinked. His throat moved. "I understand. They were informed they couldn't browse, that they should depart, that this establishment wasn't suitable for them." "Sir, we have—" Charles raised a hand. "I'm not here to debate. I'm not seeking a reimbursement. I experienced no loss yesterday, but you did. You missed an opportunity to act justly towards 2 young people, individuals raised to show respect for others, regardless of how they are treated in return. Several other employees had begun to move nearer, feigning to organize documents or wipe down surfaces. Charles continued, "My children are not disruptive. They are thoughtful, intelligent, raised with care, and they don't require your approval. However, they deserve to be regarded as people, not as dangers." Derek looked down at his shoes. The receptionist had ceased typing. Kyle cleared his throat. "Mr. Townsend, if I may, I'm not requesting an apology," Charles stated. "Apologies are simple. The crucial aspect is what one believes when no one is observing. The choices one makes when they presume no one will question them." He paused, allowing the silence to linger. "Because next time it won't be my children. It could be someone who lacks a father with connections to the media. They will leave this place with a memory that will likely remain unspoken, yet it will stay with them for the remainder of their lives. Then he turned to depart. But just before opening the door, he added, without looking back, "You can sell luxury without being small." I hope you understand how. Outside, a small gathering had formed. Two individuals were recording on their phones, one local reporter acting on a tip, and a woman holding a microphone. Charles had not alerted them. The news had simply spread. A change permeated the air, not in temperature, but in feeling. Charles descended onto the dealership pavement with calm, measured steps. His expression remained steady despite the small group gathering. Two college students from a local school stood apart, their phones out, quietly speaking to one another. A reporter from KXME5 News was already in the process of speaking, murmuring in her microphone, uncertain if she was broadcasting live. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not seek out a podium. He paused close to the entrance, straightened his jacket, and began to speak. I hadn't intended to offer any words today. However, I understand the nature of things. If I remain silent now, another will attempt to voice my thoughts. He raised his gaze, observing the limited faces present. My son, Malik, and my daughter, Ayana, arrived here yesterday afternoon. They were quiet. They didn't disturb anything. They came here to observe. Like any other young person with a flicker of anticipation and a hope in their heart, his voice remained steady. It wasn't booming, it was gentle. So gentle, it compelled people to draw closer. Yet they were asked to depart. Not for violating a regulation, not for handling something inappropriately, but because someone determined they didn't fit, that they presented an issue before they uttered a single word. The college student clutching the phone released a quiet, trembling sigh. Charles continued, "I've worked my whole life to build something that would last. And I've taught my children that what you build doesn't just sit in your bank account. It lives in how you treat people, in the everyday decisions, the ones you make when nobody's watching." He paused again, not for drama, but because the next words meant something. Yesterday, someone looked at my children and didn't see who they were. They saw who they assumed they were, and they dismissed them. It's possible to be disrespectful without raising your voice. Sometimes it's about making someone feel diminished in a place they were eager to enter. Behind the glass doors, Kyle stood watching, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Charles glanced over his shoulder briefly, then returned his attention to the people ahead of him. I'm not suggesting anyone should boycott this establishment. I don't endorse that approach. I'm no longer even feeling anger. I am simply weary of observing this recurring behavior. It's deeply troubling to see young people treated as if they've committed crimes before any wrongdoing has occurred. Such experiences leave a lasting impact. Silence allows these situations to persist. Several more people paused on the sidewalk. A delivery person across the street adjusted their sunglasses to observe more closely. I came today because my children should not have been subjected to that kind of treatment, and because I want them to understand that when something is wrong, it shouldn't be ignored. You confront it with clarity, with dignity, and without allowing it to change who you are. He retreated towards a Rolls-Royce, his hand resting on the door handle. One more point. My kids left yesterday, holding their heads high. That speaks volumes about their character and reveals nothing about the person who attempted to diminish them. He entered the car and remained silent. The onlookers did not offer applause. There was no clapping. A stunned silence filled the space as everyone absorbed the information, the visuals, and the implications. Inside the dealership, Derek lowered himself into a chair. The receptionist's eyes were brimming with tears, and she couldn't explain why. Kyle Ensign stayed near the window, his arms held rigidly at his sides. Yet, he understood that it was no longer possible to manage the narrative. By that afternoon, the first video appeared on Twitter, followed by Instagram, and then the news. The story began to develop independently. By lunchtime, the story had moved beyond local coverage. A shaky vertical phone video, initially recorded by college freshman Tori Clements, had already garnered over 2 million views on X. The accompanying caption stated, "This man just entered a dealership that disrespected his kids and addressed the situation with remarkable composure." I'm truly speechless. Viewers weren't simply sharing the video. They were analyzing it, pausing specific moments, magnifying details, and engaging in discussions and debates within comment threads. A woman from Flagstaff shared a story, noting that Charles Townsend repaired her father's laptop in 2001 and refused payment. She described him as having always been exceptional. However, other reactions were less charitable. One anonymous user, whose profile picture featured an eagle, questioned why the children hadn't disclosed their father's identity, suggesting a desire to portray themselves as victims, which led to the situation escalating. The story subsequently appeared on morning talk shows. During a segment titled, "Billionaire Father Calls Out Discrimination at Tempe Car Dealership," Good Morning Phoenix reported that the dealership's Yelp rating plummeted from 4.2 to 2.1 within hours. Numerous one-star reviews appeared quickly. Customers cited concerns like rude and dismissive staff, feeling that a teenage son was treated like a criminal and vows to never return. Some reviewers claimed that unless one is wearing a suit and tie, they would be asked to leave before speaking. Naturally, the negative response wasn't solely from unfamiliar reviewers. Community organizations also started focusing attention on the situation, advocating for discussions regarding young people, societal views, and implicit prejudice. Amidst this, the dealership issued a response. This was a brief, 2-paragraph apology published on their website and Instagram page, stating, "We regret the recent experience that took place at our showroom and are actively reviewing our policies. We strive to provide a welcoming environment to all guests and take these matters seriously." The reactions online spoke volumes. The regret appears to stem from exposure rather than genuine remorse. Instead of policy review, perhaps employee evaluation is needed. This apology lacks sincerity, resembling a fine instead of an expression of concern. Privately, Collinson was working to manage the situation. He had already contacted 2 PR consultants, both of whom advised him to minimize communication, avoid public attention, and refrain from attempts at damage control. However, online sentiment disregarded PR strategies. The public demanded openness, accountability, and concrete steps. While Malik and Ayanna remained at home, their phones buzzed incessantly with messages, some from friends and others from unknown numbers. Ayanna showed her brother a message that elicited laughter, even amidst the circumstances. "Girl, is that your dad on the news? Tell him to run for office or something. I'm dead." However, more difficult messages soon followed. "Why didn't y'all just walk away?" One read, "Ain't nobody owes you a car." Another stated, "Not everything is about race." A final message simply asked, "He probably thought you were skipping school. So what? Rich people want sympathy now?" Malik glanced at his screen, his jaw clenched. Ayanna touched his shoulder. "Don't read that," he mumbled, not looking up. He continued scrolling. Their father entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Put the phone down," Charles said. "Just for now." Malik paused, then placed his phone face down on the table. Ayanna did the same. Charles sat opposite them, leaning forward a little. Ayanna frowned. "You two didn't ask for this, but sometimes life decides your story's bigger than just you." "But we didn't even do anything," she added. "We just walked in." "I know," he replied. "That's what makes this so real. You did everything right. And still, someone saw you wrong." Malik stared at the tabletop. "Is it always going to be like that?" Charles paused, letting the question linger. "No," he said, "but you'll face it again. And when you do, you decide who you want to be in that moment." Reporters continued to gather outside. Inside, a feeling deeper than anger began to develop: awareness. And awareness is a persistent force. As the sun descended behind Camelback Mountain, it stretched shadows across the towns and backyard. It had been 2 days since Charles spoke at the dealership, 2 extended, peaceful days filled with news coverage, messages, and public commentary. Yet, shielded by the hedges, a sense of calm prevailed. Charles stood by the grill, methodically flipping salmon fillets. Malik was seated at the patio table, his elbows on his knees, gazing out across the lawn. Ayanna was leaning against the railing, her face hidden within her hoodie. There were no cameras, no inquiries, just family. "You know," Charles began, "without looking up, when I was 16, I saved for 2 years to purchase my first car, a 1994 Corolla. It was faded red and had manual windows. Ayanna looked at him. You mentioned it didn't have AC, correct? Charles chuckled. None at all. A Phoenix summer nearly cooked me. But I cherished that car. I received that treatment not because of kindness, but because I deserved it. Malik finally glanced in my direction. Have you ever experienced something like that? Like we did? Charles acknowledged with a single nod. More times than I can recall. Being followed when entering stores. Being ridiculed when applying for bank loans. I was once refused service at a diner in Tucson. I was there with my code books in my lap, and I simply departed without a confrontation. But why didn't I respond? Malik inquired, mirroring my current reaction. Charles then turned another fillet. I didn't believe my voice held weight previously. I felt that remaining unnoticed was the sole path to progress. He paused, but I was mistaken. The grill emitted a quiet hiss. The truth is, son, enduring enough disrespect can lead you to forget what it feels like to be acknowledged. And I never desired that for you, nor for your sister. Ayanna took a seat next to her brother. You certainly ensured we were noticed. Charles now addressed them both. Being noticed isn't sufficient. One must be prepared for the consequences. The acclaim, the disapproval, the individuals who will support you for taking a stand, and those who will oppose it. Malik glanced at his hands. I never intended for it to become an issue. I simply wished to observe a car. I understand, Charles stated. That's what makes it significant. You weren't seeking attention. You were simply living your life. And someone objected to the appearance of that. They paused briefly. I am proud of you, Charles added. Both of you. Ayanna shrugged. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't attempt to demonstrate anything. You simply remained genuine, she said. It didn't seem courageous. It shouldn't, he responded. Courage is often understated. It's about not compromising your integrity in a world that occasionally lacks it. A quiet stillness enveloped the yard. Then Ayanna smiled. So, are we still searching for a car or what? Charles grinned. I anticipated you would inquire. Malik straightened up. Are you serious? Charles threw a set of keys onto the table. They fell near Malik's hand with a quiet clink. Check the garage tomorrow, he said. But it's not about the car. It's about who you become while driving it. That matters more than anything with an engine. Ayanna leaned into her brother, teasing. You better not crash it on the first day. Please, Malik shot back. I'm driving like it's made of glass. Charles laughed, and for the first time in days, the weight of the moment began to ease. Some stories conclude with anger, others with quietness. But this one concludes with a lesson. Sometimes the most effective way to respond is to remain upright, peaceful, truthful, and acknowledged. If this story evoked a feeling in you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge, connect, and remind us who we truly are. Two adult men were laughing at a young woman attempting to work out. The gym was full, but no one intervened. That is until Terrence spoke up and caused everyone to stop ignoring the situation. The familiar scent of sweat and rubber filled the air. Dumbbells made a clunking sound, treadmills vibrated, and a few early gym-goers strained through their exercises with headphones on. It was a little after 7 a.m. at Ironworks Fitness in Knoxville, Tennessee. A typical Tuesday for many, but for Terrence Roy, it was leg day. Leg day held a special significance. He was finishing up wiping down the leg press when he noticed her. She appeared to be no older than 25. She had a tall, athletic build, her hair pulled back, and looked slightly out of place as if it were her first week at that gym. She lingered near the squat rack, clearly attempting to adjust the bar. This wasn't uncommon. Everyone begins somewhere. However, he then observed something else. Two men, likely in their mid to late 30s, white, wearing compression shirts that seemed unnecessary and displaying an unwarranted confidence. They were not exercising. They simply stood, resting on the preacher curl bench, observing her. Initially, the sounds were quiet, hushed whispers and slight chuckles. Then, one of them spoke, his voice carrying enough for many in the gym to hear. Hey, sweetheart, that bar's heavier than you. Are you certain you don't need assistance? The other responded with a loud, distinct laugh. She likely saw it on TikTok and believed she could simply enter and lift as a professional. Terrence paused, towel still in hand. His body tightened. He recognized that tone, sarcastic, yet with an underlying negativity. A combination of mockery and a sense of privilege. The kind that diminishes you without physical confrontation. The woman remained silent, continuously adjusting the bar, her gaze fixed forward. A subtle tremor ran through her hands. She inhaled deeply, as if suppressing something. Terence surveyed the room. Approximately 15 people were present. Some had overheard something. He observed this by their reactions. A man wearing a red hoodie glanced at his phone, feigning disinterest. A woman near the ellipticals seemed uneasy, but remained silent. There was no movement, no vocalization. He settled onto a nearby bench, observing for a moment longer. Then, the realization struck him. This was bigger than just those two individuals and their inappropriate remarks. It concerned everyone present, including him, as they observed the event unfold and remained silent. Such incidents hadn't been uncommon in a location like this before. However, it may have been the first instance he found impossible to overlook. He rose deliberately, secured his water bottle, and approached. "Hey," he stated, his voice composed yet resolute. The two men turned. One displayed a smirk. "Talking to us?" The taller one questioned, raising his eyebrows. Terence affirmed. "Do you find it amusing to harass someone while she's attempting to train?" The shorter one shrugged. "Relax, man. We were just joking," he said. "She didn't laugh," Terence said, shifting his gaze towards the woman. She shook her head, softly. Several heads now turned. A man pausing between sets looked up. A staff member behind the counter moved closer, listening. The taller man folded his arms. "Your father or something?" he asked. "No, just someone who's tired of people thinking this kind of thing is acceptable." A silence descended, thick and tense, yet he remained still. "Look, man," the shorter one began, his earlier confidence diminished. "We didn't intend any harm." Terence acknowledged, "Yeah, that's the issue," but the room remained unresponsive. He sensed an underlying tension, a peculiar quietness born of people feigning ignorance of what they had clearly heard. A palpable tension filled the room, as if everyone was holding their breath, anticipating how much further it would escalate before someone intervened. That's the feeling at Ironworks. Terence remained still, and so did the two men. The taller man, identified as Kyle by his bright blue gym badge, still wore a tight smirk, though his arms were now folded across his chest, a less overtly confident posture. The shorter man, Bryce, had taken a step back, as if uncertain if a confrontation was imminent. Terence was not present to engage in a physical altercation. He didn't need to. His mere presence conveyed authority. And for a man like him, 40 years old, with 2 children and 2 decades of maintaining composure in tense situations, he had learned that sometimes remaining still could be the most impactful action. But he also observed something else. Still, few people intervened. Some glanced up, then looked back down as if they had mistakenly chosen the wrong performance and wished to change channels. Others appeared uneasy, seemingly hoping he would cease and move on, and it stung him. Not because he anticipated assistance, but because he understood how readily people could retreat behind their earbuds or phone screens when situations became complex. One man, likely in his mid-50s, sat on a bench pressing dumbbells. He shook his head, not at Kyle or Bryce, but at Terence, as if he were the issue, as if speaking out was more troubling than the inappropriate comments being made initially. The young woman, who had been silent, now sat on the edge of the squat rack platform, pretending to tie her shoe, even though it was already secure. It was a way to keep occupied, a way to avoid looking at anyone. She wished she wasn't involved in this situation, but she already was. Terence took a deliberate breath. He angled himself, just enough so his voice would reach everyone. "You all heard what they said, and you observed how she reacted." He spoke, not yelling, but ensuring his voice carried throughout the room. If someone addressed your sister, your daughter, your friend in that manner, would you remain silent? Still, no response. Kyle appeared to be about to speak, as if he had a clever retort prepared. However, only a tense jaw and narrowed eyes were visible. Bryce moved again. Listen, man, nobody intends to provoke a conflict here. Terrence nodded, seeming to reconsider. Lauren, the gym manager, who was in her mid-30s with a blonde ponytail and a name tag, approached from behind the front desk. She moved deliberately, appearing somewhat apprehensive. It seemed she anticipated complaints and was carefully assessing the situation. Is everything okay here? She inquired, her gaze shifting between the men. Terrence responded, just clearing something up. Kyle interjected, this dude thinks he can tell us what to say to people now. Lauren observed him, then the woman who remained near the barbell. She understood, perhaps not immediately, but sufficiently. Well, she stated cautiously, we don't permit harassment here. If anyone feels disrespected, that is something we must address seriously. Bryce laughed dismissively. Harassment? He remarked. We said one thing, he added. Terrence interjected. That was enough. A silence followed. Then, Lauren slowly turned toward the young woman. Are you all right? She inquired. The woman rose, silent but composed. She stated she was only here to exercise. Lauren affirmed, understood. You are welcome here. Please inform us if you encounter any further issues. And that concluded the interaction. The atmosphere didn't ease with a significant event. There was no altercation, no theatrical display, no commendation. However, a change occurred. Bryce and Kyle shared a glance. Subsequently, without further conversation, they departed toward the locker room, speaking quietly to themselves. No one intervened. It wasn't necessary. Terrence turned and made eye contact with the woman. She offered him a slight nod, a gesture of thanks without speaking. More impactful than the interaction itself was the stillness, the expressions, and the way others seemed to shrink in that instant. He repeatedly considered what the outcome would have been if he hadn't been present. However, the day continued, and the narrative began to spread beyond the gym. Terrence was in the process of filling his water bottle at the fountain when he detected a voice coming from behind him. A sense of triumph seemed to fill him. He didn't turn around immediately. He recognized the voice. It was Kyle, that familiar mocking tone, now without a crowd, sounding less assertive, more intimate. Terrence quietly replaced the cap on his bottle before turning to face him. Kyle stood alone, his arms hanging loosely, the sharpness in his features softened, replaced by what appeared to be wounded pride. Perhaps embarrassment, maybe simply the annoyance of not having the final say. I'm not here to be a hero, Terrence stated. I came here to exercise, just like everyone else. Kyle moved nearer. You reacted excessively over a minor incident. She hadn't expressed any concerns. You intervened as if she required assistance. Terrence subtly supported himself against the wall, maintaining his composure. She didn't need rescuing, but she shouldn't have been ridiculed either. You deliberately made her feel uneasy. Kyle made a dismissive sound. So now you're the guardian of feelings. Terrence inclined his head. It was simply a grown man weary of witnessing individuals feigning acceptance of public displays of erratic behavior. Kyle's jaw tightened. You don't know me, and you don't know her, Terrence responded. But that didn't prevent him from speaking. There was a pause, a genuine one, where Kyle remained motionless, blinking, as if a portion of him wasn't accustomed to anyone challenging without shouting or striking. Just statements, simply a reflection. Then Kyle surveyed his surroundings. The hallway adjacent to the locker rooms was silent. Just them and the low hum of a treadmill belt nearby. You people always got to make it racial, he muttered. Terrence felt it. That shift, that old tired line, meant to flip the blame, meant to derail. He kept his voice steady. You brought race into it when you thought she was an easy target. You thought nobody would say anything. That's not on me. Kyle didn't answer. I've been in places like this all my life, Terrence went on, and I know when something's just a joke. When a situation arose involving asserting dominance, Terrence remained silent. Then Kyle exhaled sharply and mumbled, whatever, man. As he turned towards the locker room, Terrence observed him leave, then subtly shook his head. It wasn't a reaction of anger, nor of triumph, but of understanding. He had no desire to cause humiliation. He didn't require a public victory. The crucial aspect was that he had been heard, that Kyle, even if unwilling to acknowledge it, recognized it. And at that moment, a voice spoke behind him, quieter this time. It was the young woman. She had changed her shirt, with her hoodie pulled halfway over her head. "Thank you," she said, her voice almost a whisper for saying something. Terrence gave a small smile. "You're welcome. I didn't know what to do," she added. "I just froze." "That's okay," he said. "You don't owe anyone a reaction. That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes just making it through moments like that is enough." She nodded. "I'm Janelle," she said to Terrence. They shook hands. "Do you come here often?" she inquired, with a slight amusement at how predictable it seemed. "3 times a week," he stated, "in the morning before work." She responded with a smile. "It appears I will begin arriving early as well." Then, she proceeded towards the exit. There were no tears, no dramatic display of emotion. Simply a moment of quiet understanding between two individuals who now had a shared experience. However, as that phase concluded, another development had already begun to unfold beyond the gym's confines. By the time Terrence arrived home that evening, the children were already partially through dinner. Sonia, his wife, balanced a laptop on her knee while guiding their youngest through spelling homework, as was typical for a weekday. It reminded him that everyday life continues regardless of significant events that occurred earlier. However, the burden persisted as he entered. He attempted to shed it at the gym, to release it while driving. But such experiences don't always remain where they originate. They travel with you, subtly. "How was the gym?" Sonia inquired while serving mashed potatoes for their son, Caleb. Terrence paused. It was peculiar, actually, that prompted her to look up, her eyebrows raised. He recounted everything to her. He presented only the facts, without embellishment or exaggeration. What Kyle and Bryce had said, how no one intervened initially, and how he ultimately did. He described Janelle's reaction, the discomfort, and the ensuing silence. Sonia listened intently, chewing deliberately and maintaining eye contact. Upon his completion, she leaned back and released a breath through her nose. "It's the typical situation," she remarked, not dismissively, but with a weary tone, a recognizable tiredness. "I understand," Terrence responded. However, something about today felt different. "Do you mean the fact that you were the sole person to comment?" she inquired. "Yes, that," and he hesitated. "I observed how many people listened and remained silent. Because that's often the way things unfold," she stated, rising to rinse a plate. "People avoid involvement. They desire to prevent uncomfortable moments. They're apprehensive about speaking up and becoming entangled. Some believe it's not their concern." He nodded slowly. "It shouldn't be typical," he thought. "It shouldn't," she replied in agreement. However, it was later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was still, when Terrence checked his phone. Alerts appeared from a local Facebook group he followed, Knoxville Fit Life Community. A post detailed the event. "Saw something crazy at Ironworks today. A man stood up for a woman being teased by 2 guys at the squat rack. There was no violence, just a direct challenge, which is commendable." The post already had over 100 comments. Some users expressed praise for the individual. Others inquired about the situation. A few responded with predictable reactions. The complete details are unknown. It seems people are easily offended these days. Humor is no longer tolerated. Terrence did not participate in the discussion. He simply observed it unfold. A short clip was even posted, a shaky, 3-second phone video showing him standing in front of Kyle and Bryce, his back to the camera. A still image depicts a man steadfastly remaining in place. He felt uncomfortable being the focus of attention, not due to shame, but because it diverted focus from the core message. The intention was for the discussion to highlight how easily inappropriate actions can go unnoticed if no one speaks up. The following morning at the gym, the atmosphere had shifted. Janelle was present again. This time, she offered him a fist bump, her face displaying a friendly smile as if they had been gym companions for years. People observed, without negativity. Several individuals nodded in his direction, a gesture of understanding rather than attention-seeking. Lauren, the gym manager, approached him discreetly once he concluded a set. "Hey," she began, "thank you again for yesterday." He turned to face her. We're experienced previous difficulties, she explained, with people voicing sentiments they perceive as benign. This time, discussions are occurring about it. Perhaps it will bring about a change. Maybe, he responded. Just as he reached for his towel, a man from the back, appearing to be in his mid-60s, with a wiry build and gray in his beard, approached. I was here yesterday, he stated. Terrence raised an eyebrow. Yes, the man confirmed. He paused, then added, I didn't say anything then. Should have. I have 2 granddaughters. I often think if that were one of them, I want someone like you close by. Terrence remained silent for a moment. Then the man offered a half smile and said, Appreciate that. My name's Roland. If you ever need a place to stay, I'm around. Terrence hadn't anticipated who would enter next, and the words he would speak. Terrence hadn't expected anyone in particular when the gym doors opened late that Friday afternoon. But there he was, Bryce. No caide, no savagir, no smirk. Just a man walking in with headphones around his neck and something in his eyes that hadn't been there previously. Terrence noticed him the moment he entered. He was uncertain whether Bryce would disregard him, attempt a confrontation, or act as if the previous day hadn't occurred. However, Bryce did not feign indifference. Instead, he approached Terrence directly after he completed his warm-up set on the lat pull-down machine. Hey, he said, his voice softer than it had been previously. Do you have a minute? Terrence hesitated before responding. He maintained his grip on the machine's handle, carefully observing Bryce's expression for any indication of mockery. He detected none. All right, Terrence finally said. Bryce shifted his weight, restless. I spoke with Kyle, he started. He believes you intentionally embarrassed us. He's still upset, but Terrence remained silent. I have 2 sons, Bryce continued, aged 10 and 8. They were at the park recently. I observe an older boy teasing them. Nothing serious, just provoking them. And I understood. I felt paralyzed. I didn't know how to react. I simply watched. He hesitated. I recalled my silence during that incident with the girl. We were certainly behaving poorly, and Terrence observed it. Now what? You were right, Bryce stated, his gaze unwavering. I don't want to be that person, not for my children and not for my own sake. Terrence shifted back a little. It's not about being correct. It's about recognizing when to cease being the individual you'd avoid encountering. Bryce affirmed. They stood in silence for a moment. Just 2 men in gym clothes, under fluorescent lights, speaking as if the conversation held significance. I'm not going to apologize for Kyle, Bryce stated. He's got his own things to sort out. But I do apologize for my words, for my behavior. Terrence extended his hand. I accept that, they said, shaking hands firmly, briefly, genuinely. Later that evening, Terrence sat on the porch with his daughter, Elise, who'd just turned 14 and had recently taken an interest in running. She inquired about what occurred at the gym. She remembered hearing her mom briefly mention something earlier. He paused, then recounted the events. He presented the information directly, without minimizing its impact. He described the conversation, the quiet moments, the disagreement, and the subsequent apology. He observed her reaction as he spoke, noting the shifts in her expression with each detail. So you simply spoke with them? She questioned, lifting her eyebrows. Yes, he replied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't create a disturbance. I simply asked them why they believed that type of conduct was acceptable. Did that have an effect? It didn't produce immediate changes, but perhaps it prompted reflection. That's frequently how shifts begin. Elise glanced at her sneakers, fiddling with the laces. I'm not sure I would have the courage to say something like that, she whispered. Terrence smiled. The interesting aspect is you don't feel courageous when you do it. You simply feel that someone needs to. She looked up at him, her eyes gentle, yet containing something else now. Perhaps pride. I will try, she said softly. You don't need to do anything special, he responded. Just pay attention. When something doesn't feel right, don't ignore it. Speak up if you can, or be there for someone who can't. They sat in silence for a while afterward. There was no need to fill the space, just the kind of silence that felt substantial instead of vacant. But Monday was approaching, and someone unexpected still had something to say before this story would feel complete. Monday morning began as any other. Terrence parked his usual spot, swiped his gym card at the front desk, and proceeded to the free weights. He anticipated a routine start to the week, nothing out of the ordinary. Then he noticed him. Roland, the older man who had spoken to him a few days prior, was positioned by the dumbbell rack, stretching his shoulders as if preparing for an extensive set. However, today he wasn't in workout clothes. He wore jeans, boots, and a dark jacket zipped up halfway. He wasn't here to train. He was waiting. "Got a minute?" Roland inquired, glancing up as Terrence neared. Terrence affirmed, and they walked towards the small lounge area near the vending machines. The gym was still, and few noticed them. Roland clasped his hands together, appearing hesitant. "I've been considering what occurred," he finally stated. "What you did, what you said." Terrence remained silent. Roland added, "I'm 66. I've witnessed a great deal in my years. I spent my childhood in Ohio during the 60s. My father owned a tire shop. We weren't wealthy, but we managed. I recall the time the schools integrated. I remember the underlying stress. However, we never discussed it at home." He paused. "And because of that lack of discussion, I felt unprepared when difficult situations arose. I would witness events, both at work and around town, and would tell myself, well, that's not my concern, believing silence equated to neutrality. It became clear later that it was not the case." Terrence listened, remaining silent. Roland's voice lowered a little. "The day you spoke to those men, I was present. I was 2 benches away. I heard everything." Terrence nodded slowly, "And I assumed you noticed. I felt compelled to intervene. I truly did, but I couldn't speak. I remained motionless." He reacted with a shake of his head, and I'm still regretting it. Terrence moved closer. "You are here now. That has value." Roland exhaled. "I have grandchildren, 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls are of mixed heritage. My daughter married a black man, a good guy who teaches 6th grade. I often think about them. If they had been in that gym and someone had spoken to them in that manner, I would want someone like Terrence present, someone who wouldn't remain silent." The room felt different now, not negatively, simply more substantial. "I've expressed sentiments in the past that I regret," Roland admitted. "I've allowed certain things to go unaddressed that I shouldn't have, but I am striving to improve. That's why I came today, to offer my gratitude, and to assure you that I will speak up in the future. No more hesitation." Terrence finally smiled. "That meant more than you probably realize." They shook hands again. This one felt different. Not a gesture of thanks, but a recognition of a new understanding. "I might even start working out again," Roland added with a chuckle. Terrence grinned. "Start with light weights. Don't go breaking something." They both laughed, and the tension in the air finally eased. Following Roland's departure, Terrence stood near the mirror wall, a towel draped over his shoulder, and observed the room for a brief moment. It was the same gym with the same walls. Yet it felt altered, not due to any sudden improvement in everyone's abilities, nor because of the eradication of racism, but because of a subtle change. One person spoke, another listened, a third reconsidered their perspective. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it represented a difference. And sometimes, a small difference is enough to initiate progress. Even with everything, the true understanding didn't come until Terrence saw what his daughter posted later that night. It was approximately 9:30 when Terrence finally sat down on the edge of his bed. Shoes kicked off, lights dimmed, the soft hum of the hallway fan in the background. Sonia was reading, legs curled under the blanket, her glasses sliding down her nose. He grabbed his phone to check a few messages before bed, and that's when he saw it, a new post from Elise. He clicked. It was a selfie. An ordinary picture, her hair pulled back, no filter, wearing her school hoodie. But it was the caption that stopped him. "My dad stood up for a stranger this week." He didn't yell, he didn't throw hands, he just spoke up. And that was enough to make people think, including me. I used to believe keeping quiet made you neutral, but I was wrong. Silence has side. I hope I'm brave like him when it matters. Terrence stared at the screen, not because he was surprised by the message, but because it was so confident and direct. It had come from his teenage daughter, the one who used to feel anxious requesting ketchup from a server. The one who once cried when she had to recite a poem in front of her class. And now she was sharing words like that publicly. He glanced at Sonia and gave her the phone. She read it quietly, then smiled without looking up. You seem to notice she's observing your actions, don't you? Terrence sighed. I'm mostly just attempting to make it through the week. She responded, setting the phone down on the nightstand. You're managing better than that. He reclined, gazing at the ceiling, allowing the feeling to linger. Everything that transpired in the last few days, Kyle, Bryce, Janelle, Roland, Elise, all began with a single choice. Not a significant one, not a sensational one. Simply a decision to speak instead of remaining silent. That was all. That recollection remained with him profoundly. People often assume that taking a stand requires fearlessness, but that isn't the reality. Frequently, one experiences fear and doubt. There's a reluctance to create awkwardness. Yet, remaining silent has consequences for others. He recalled Janelle's expression when she described feeling paralyzed. He remembered Roland's nervous habit of rubbing his hands together as he confessed his uncertainty about what to do. He recalled Bryce struggling to express regret without appearing vulnerable. And he mused, this is the beginning. Not with elaborate pronouncements, not with online condemnation, but in tangible locations with genuine individuals who opt for the somewhat more challenging course of action. The subsequent morning, Terrence paused in his vehicle within the gym parking lot prior to entering, not to prepare himself, simply to contemplate. Afterward, he retrieved his phone and composed a message. It wasn't intended for widespread dissemination. The goal wasn't validation, it was simply sharing a truth. Significant impact doesn't require a grand gesture. It involves acknowledging injustice and speaking out, regardless of fear or isolation. That's where progress begins. He published the message and exited the vehicle. It was another Monday, another workout, but with a feeling of lightness he hadn't experienced previously. Many people have experienced moments similar to those described. If you've hesitated in the past, remember you have future opportunities. The important consideration is, in those future instances, how will you respond? Speak out, even when it causes discomfort, even if the matter seems minor. Because remaining silent may preserve your ease, but it won't safeguard another's dignity. And someone close to you may be awaiting a voice such as yours. Should this story have struck a chord, please share it and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, as we have additional stories exploring the true meaning of doing what's right.